What is the first weapon you think of when you talk about ancient long-range weapons? Probably a bow or the more recent crossbow. What about the sling? This seemingly very simple weapon consisting of only ropes and a stone was much more effective than the bow. For example, you have probably heard the story of how David, armed with a sling, was able to defeat the huge enemy Goliath. And you probably think that's just a legend. But the people of antiquity knew what this formidable weapon was capable of. You can find stories of how the slinger could kill a bull from a distance of 500 feet and with a single blow. And the Hero of Alexandria, a Greek mathematician and engineer, wrote that a lead projectile fired from a sling would pierce a bronze cuirass and get stuck in the body of an opponent. And no special projectiles were needed for this weapon. When you ran out of ammunition, you could just start shooting rocks. Later in the Middle Ages, people decided to modify this weapon and built a giant version of the sling, which could throw a 300-pound projectile. Europe was dotted with castles in the 12th century, and capturing a castle was an important objective during warfare in the Middle Ages for several reasons. First, castles were often strategically located on high ground or in key positions, such as river crossings, which made them valuable military targets. Second, castles often held valuable resources such as food, weapons, and supplies that could help support troops during a long campaign. And sieging a castle was very hard work, so numerous siege machines were invented in the Middle Ages, the most fearsome and powerful of which was the trebuchet. It was a devastating projectile throwing machine that used gravity to throw very heavy projectiles, causing serious damage to the fortress walls. Despite the appearance of this siege machine, the construction itself is quite simple. It is essentially a giant sling. A lever and two arms, short and long, are attached to a stable frame. The long arm has a rope saddle for projectiles, and the short arm has a counterweight. Even tree trunks could be used as a counterweight. When the counterweight was lowered, the shoulder with the roping saddle would rise and launch the projectile. There is virtually no consensus as to where and when the trebuchet was developed. However, the earliest mention of it is found as early as 1187, and it is known that they have been used since the Third Crusade, thanks to which the Crusaders were able to take Acre and Constantinople. But by the 14th century, giant siege weapons appeared on the battlefield, and the most famous of these is the Warwolf. It is the largest and most powerful trebuchet ever built. It was built in Scotland in the late 13th century and was used during the siege of Stirling Castle in 1304. The Warwolf was capable of accurately launching projectiles weighing up to 298 pounds at a distance of 660 feet. It had a throwing arm of over 49 feet long and could launch projectiles at 120 miles per hour. It is difficult to say how tall this weapon was when assembled, but some sources state that it was 300 to 400 feet high, which is very hard to believe. But it is known that 30 carts carried it as it was assembled, and it took at least 3 months to assemble this giant. A contemporary account of the siege of Stirling Castle says that even before it was completed, the Scottish soldiers offered to surrender for fear that the weapon might destroy the entire castle. But King Edward I of England sent the peace party back to the castle, declaring, "You do not deserve any grace, but must surrender to my will." The King of England decided to continue the siege and witness the weapon's destructive power. According to the legend, the trebuchet was so powerful that the shock waves from its projectiles caused the women in the castle to miscarry. Still, the Golden Horde only needed a small trebuchet, and a single lucky shot was enough to take out about 50% of Europe's population. But how was this possible? In the early 14th century, there was an outbreak of plague in Asia, and the nomads of these Golden Horde managed to bring the disease to Europe. During the siege of the Genoese fortress in the Crimean Peninsula in 1346, Golden Horde Khan Janibek used small trebuchets to throw the bodies of those who died of the plague behind the walls. Unfortunately for the Khan, the siege failed and he retreated from the fortress. However, it was enough to infect not only all the people in the fortress with the infected bodies, but also the rats, who together with the Genoese traders spread the disease all over Europe. Over the next 7 years, it led to the extinction of 30 to 60% of Europe's inhabitants. A few small trebuchets wiped out more people than an atomic bomb could. The last known use of a trebuchet in combat was at Cortez's battle with the Aztecs in 1521. Cortez did not want to waste gunpowder, so he ordered the construction of a trebuchet that could throw stones weighing 11 kilograms. The idea was unsuccessful. One of the projectiles flew vertically upward and destroyed the machine itself. Speaking of the Aztecs, we mentioned the jaguar warriors in our previous video and said that they used the macuahuitl, a wooden club with several embedded blades of obsidian. And you might think this weapon is ineffective compared to the steel sword of the conquistadors, but you would be wrong. The conquistadors underestimated this weapon, which later became the Spanish conqueror's main fear. In a report by one of Hernan Cortez's soldiers, it is said that this obsidian sword was capable of decapitating a horse with one blow. By the time Cortez came to America, the Aztecs had still not mastered iron, and one might say they were in the last stages of the Stone Age. At the same time, they were very warlike people and had long practiced making weapons from available materials. The sharpest of the available materials was obsidian. You might think that this material would be clearly inferior in sharpness to steel, which was used for weapons by the Spaniards, and you would be wrong. The cutting edge of obsidian could be as thick as 30 angstroms. For comparison, most household razor blades have a 300 to 600 angstroms resistance. The main reason is that obsidian is not cut but chipped, making the edge smooth and sharp. Surgeons use obsidian scalpels for high precision operations. Some studies on rats have shown that the use of obsidian blades promotes faster healing because of the cleaner cuts. Back to macuahuitl. The material is very sharp, but could a wooden sword with obsidian blades cut off the head of a horse? For the Spike TV reality show Deadliest Warrior, there was a replica of a horse's head, created using a horse skeleton and ballistic gel. The actor and martial artist succeeded in decapitating the model, but it took him 3 blows to do so. Strikes with a macuahuitl replica were most effective when it was swung and then pulled back on impact, creating a sawing motion. So yes, decapitating a horse with such a weapon was quite realistic, but not with a single blow as the conquistadors wrote. But despite the fact that the macuahuitl brought a lot of trouble to the Spaniards, it had many disadvantages in combat compared to European steel swords. The obsidian blades used on macuahuitls tended to break when struck against steel swords or plate armor. The thin, interchangeable blades used on the macuahuitl were easily blunted or broken by repeated strikes on bone or wood, making skilled use of the weapon critical. It takes longer to pick up and swing a club than it does to strike with a sword. In the end, the macuahuitl has one advantage over the steel sword: incredible sharpness. But that advantage is outweighed by a number of disadvantages. That is why this weapon disappeared forever from the battlefield. But perhaps this weapon inspired the Europeans to create the perfect blade: the flamberge or flaming sword. If you want to see a video on the channel about this and other incredible blades, let me know in the comments, and we'll make such a video for you. But back to the long-range weapon we started with. You've probably seen the scene in the Van Helsing movie where the main character uses a rapid-fire crossbow. This weapon looks very cool, but did you know that such a weapon existed in reality? And it was invented in China almost 2,000 years ago, about 800 years before the crossbow was ever used in Europe. This weapon is called the Chu Ko Nu, and its earliest mention is found in 180 AD, during the period of the Warring Kingdoms in China. The multi-shot crossbow combined the actions of pulling the bow, placing the bolt, and firing with one hand, providing a much higher rate of fire than the conventional crossbow. The most common design of the multi-shot crossbow originated during the Ming Dynasty and consisted of a top-mounted magazine containing a bolt magazine, a rectangular lever, shoulders, a bowstring, and a stock. The shooter simply had to fill the magazine with bolts, pull back the lever, and fire. This weapon was extremely easy to use and incredibly quick to fire. In addition, both the Ming Dynasty in China and the Joseon Dynasty in Korea developed variants that either fired 2 or 3 bolts at once. But this firing technique would reach its maximum effectiveness later when gunpowder was invented in China. Then the shooter would be able to fire half 100 arrows at a time. This weapon was originally developed in China in the 14th century and is called the Nest of Bees. This weapon could easily be called the first handheld multiple rocket launcher. Although not all versions of these weapons were handheld, some were large and mounted on carts. Such guns could carry 32 full-sized arrows strapped to rockets that had a maximum range of 300 paces. These weapons got their name not only because of the many missiles they could launch, but also because of the hexagonal wooden rocket launcher. When several pods are stored together, they look like a beehive. China also had a 50-shot version of the bee nest. Although it fired smaller rockets, it was designed for naval combat, where it was one of few guns capable of hitting enemy ships from a headwind position. No one would want to stand in the way of a man armed with a nest of bees. While China was already mastering gunpowder, Africa invented another, no less amazing long-range weapon. If you've ever thrown knives, then you probably know how hard it is to make the knife hit the target with its tip. It can hit the handle and fly away. And the Libyans in 1350 solved this problem. They invented a knife that has a 100% probability of hitting the target with its points. This weapon is called a kpinga, a curved or unconventional shaped blade or several blades joined together. It was made of bronze. The length and shape depended on the variety but averaged up to 24 inches. The spear was used for horizontal throwing up to 100 feet and also to hunt small and medium-sized animals. They were thrown from a distance of 10 meters when fired en masse, and even if the kpinga struck an enemy shield, it could bounce off into a nearby enemy. The kpinga was very effective because the curvature of the blades gave a quick rotation and a large area to wound. Warriors also used it as a bludgeon in close combat, wrapping the handle in leather for less recoil upon impact. This is just a small part of the incredible weapons that mankind invented, and if you want to see other weapons, you can watch our other most incredible ancient weapons video. And also, don't forget to give us a like and subscribe. And if you want to support the channel financially, the Patreon channel link is in the description. See you around.